Thank you, Adam. I think we'll shift gears a little bit now and move from some of these functional areas into regions of the world where Chinese activism or Chinese decisions are really fundamentally challenging U.S. options as well. Ambassador Shinn, David, let's start in Africa, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to look at this from the standpoint of an Africanist, not a sinologist, although I've had to learn something about China in the last 5 years. There are essentially 4 Chinese interests in Africa today. And because interests by definition are either medium term or long term, I would suggest that all 4 of these are trends that you're going to see well into the future in terms of the China-Africa relationship. The first is access to natural resources, oil, minerals, timber, some other lesser commodities. China is very much interested in these for purposes of continuing to fuel its rapidly growing economy. The second is the need for political support of governments around the world, and in the case of Africa, 53 of them, that's more than 1/4 of the membership of the United Nations. The Africans have frequently been supportive of China in international fora going back many decades. The third is a related one, and that is to eliminate Taiwan's diplomatic presence in Africa. We often forget about this. There are only 4 countries out of the 53 in Africa that still recognize Taiwan, but China spends an inordinate amount of effort to remove those last 4. It may cooperate economically with Taiwan interests in Africa, but politically they want that terminated because of the One China policy. And fourth is more of a potential than an actual interest, and that is the desire to export more to Africa. Today, Africa constitutes only 3% of China's global trade, not very much. For China, that's not huge. For Africa, it's quite large. It's a much higher percentage. But the goal is, as the Africans become richer, to try to export more Chinese goods to Africa, and China's doing quite well already. China is the second most important trade partner of Africa today after the United States, and it will probably surpass the United States next year. Now, I want to, in terms of looking to the future, I want to look at some of the challenges that China faces. Before doing that, just extrapolate a couple of issues that flow from the interests. One is the continued emphasis by China on emphasizing state sovereignty and what that implies in terms of international relationships. China uses a state-to-state focus with its relationships. Very good relations with the governments of Africa, and much less concern about all the other elements of society in these African countries. And I think that's probably true pretty much around the world. That I see continuing in the case certainly of Africa. Another is probably not paying an awful lot of attention to human rights issues and democratization issues. That's not China's forte. It's not going to be seen as a key part of their policy in Africa. They, by and large, put that in the state sovereignty category, try to ignore those kinds of issues. Another issue that I think is going to loom in the future is the whole desire for greater naval security, particularly in the Persian Gulf and the Western Indian Ocean area. You have very important oil resources, mineral resources traveling along those routes. The Chinese are subject to American naval protection basically now, and I think you're going to see an increased growing interest in extending Chinese naval ability into these areas all the way up to the East African coast, and including a number of the African countries in the Western Indian Ocean. Looking at the challenges, and in some cases you're seeing progress, in some cases you're not. Civil society is more developed in some African countries than it is in China. This is an area for concern by China as it deals with the African countries. It has to figure out a better way to deal with those African countries that have strong civil society, like South Africa, Kenya, Botswana, a fairly lengthy list of them actually. It's struggling with this. It understands that it needs to do better, and it really is trying. It's interesting to see China learn in the African context, but it still is struggling because it just doesn't have that much experience with its own civil society and in terms of how to deal with it in a collaborative way. So it's an issue to watch. A similar kind of issue is corporate social responsibility. Not a strength in China, obviously, but they're learning that some of the African countries have stronger interests in corporate social responsibility than Chinese companies are used to. They're having to grapple with it, and they're struggling with that one too. But again, you're seeing them grow in the job, as it were, and improving their situation in terms of more attention to corporate social responsibility. Related to that are issues like worker safety, paying the African minimum wage, issues that are not all that big in China. So when you go overseas and have your state companies or your private companies grappling with the same kinds of issues, you're often running into problems with poor worker safety standards, like the explosion of a Chinese mine in Zambia, and just due to negligence. This causes an awful lot of outrage among those people who are affected in Africa. They understand, again, that they have to improve on this score, but it's going to be a long slog for them in order to get up to the standard of even a few of the more progressive African countries. Chinese obviously are not strong in dealing with opposition political parties and labor unions. Labor unions are not that strong throughout Africa, but they are strong in some countries. And if you haven't figured out how to deal with labor unions in your own country, you're obviously going to have a problem dealing with them in the African countries. The Chinese, again, I think understand that, particularly as a result of a major flap over textile exports globally, but particularly to Africa, and undercutting the African textile industry, that they got into an awful lot of trouble in a number of African countries, particularly South Africa, and they have to figure out a way how to deal with that and the influence of labor unions. Opposition political parties, another one. Again, not a strength of China. Now, not all African countries have opposition political parties. Many of them don't, but some do. And if you have